Alrighty, it's another Objective Personality video. Today we're going to be looking at Patrick Stewart, going over what OP is, his type, and then an empathy strategy. For people who are familiar with Myers-Briggs, you're going to see some things that you recognize, the S and the N axis, which has to do with the way people process information, and the F and the T axis, which has to do with the way that people make decisions. The goal of the game is to get the same type that Dave and Shannon did, and this was a tough one, because Patrick Stewart is a really complicated person. He was originally a Shakespearian actor who got picked up and played Captain Picard on Star Trek Next Generation, became very famous for that, and then went on to have a bunch of other roles. He's famous for being exceedingly British and having these intense, very dramatic, acting performances, really elevating the art of theater. So we're going to start with deciders, and right away we're going to run into some issues, because Patrick Stewart is a very emotional person, just right off the bat.
Sometimes Shakespeare explores a single emotional moment and situation with text that at first blush seems literary. And the speaker seems much more articulate than he could possibly be if he was really in the actual situation. In Titus Andronicus, for instance, Titus has just seen his daughter Lavinia with her hand and her tongue cut off. She's just been mutilated and ravished, and Titus himself has just had his hand cut off. Well, one of the problems with such a speech is that in real life the emotion of the speaker would be much greater than his power to articulate that emotion in words. So it's very understandable if an actor confronted with such a speech recoils from the literary content and tries to express the emotion to the full and leaves the words to take care of themselves.
Here I raise this one hand up to heaven and bow this feeble ruin to the earth. If any power pities wretched tears, to that I call. What? Will thou kneel with me? Do then, dear heart, for heaven shall hear our prayers.
So this is clearly someone who is very comfortable expressing emotion. He's doing it as a part of a theater production, right? So this is part of his job, but this is something that he's doing for a living by choice. Here's him talking about some of his favorite Shakespearean lines. You'll notice that it's very extroverted decider talk, where he's talking about other people, other situations, rather than this is what I like directly. But there's a lot of emotional content in it.
Can you tell me a line that sticks out to you? A line that you love?
You know, there was a period in my life when I was doing a lot of Shakespeare when I worked for 12 years with the Royal Shakespeare Company in Stratford and London and touring worldwide. And people would say to me, what is your favorite Shakespearean line? Well, there are, you know, where do you begin? But I always loved the ordinary things he said, often very, very unexpectedly. So plain, so simple. For example, there's a moment at the end of one of my favorite plays, Winter's Tale, when Leontes, the king, who believed his wife had died many, many, many years ago, and he was responsible for her death, is taken to see a statue of her that has been made, and the statue suddenly moves, and it's her. And she takes her ex-husband's hand, and he says, "Oh, she's warm." He used these simple, everyday phrases at times, and they have an almost shattering impact on the verse and the poetry that surrounds them.
Yeah, so that's a lot of emotional processing. Here's him talking about having to audition with a toupee, and then interviewer is asking him how he feels about that image being very iconic in terms of the way that people emotionally value and process him and his looks.
My final audition was done wearing a hairpiece, yes. The studio wanted to see what I would look like if I looked like Bill Shatner.
And what a mistake that would have been made, because Picard and the way Picard looks is iconic.
Yes. Well, you don't see him in the mirror every morning when he gets up. He's not, especially this morning. He's not so iconic then.
Oh, I don't know. Now, I mean,
So that's a very tribe-centric response where he's very aware of how he looks to other people. But it felt kind of emotional to me. Here is Patrick Stewart talking about how Star Trek changed. The question leads into how Star Trek changed the way that he saw himself.
So a question about Macbeth. So you have to inhabit this role, as you said, and it's a drug. But it's been done and done and done and done and done by people of great talent. Oh, yeah. So what do you ask yourself? You know, you say, I'm going to step into these shoes. And Olivier has been there, and O'Toole has been there, and Gielgud has been there, and, you know.
In the past, that was intimidating. When I was working a lot at Stratford years and years ago, every opening night, I used to walk down to Holy Trinity Church.
Yeah.
Late in the afternoon and sit in one of the front pews where I could see the tomb. And, you know, I would say to this guy, help me out. Please help me out. I don't know what I'm doing.
Dear Willie, dear Willie, dear Willie.
Give me a sign. You know? Because, yes, there are these legendary actors who have given legendary performances in these great roles. Exactly. And ultimately, if you want to be a classical actor, you have got to tick off these roles because these are the roles that you'll be judged by. You know, if you hope that at some point you might have built up a reputation, it can only be built on a certain number of roles, exactly like an opera singer. There are certain roles you have to sing.
Right.
And if you don't, you're dodging the issue of the great challenges. So,
dodging your chance to be considered among the greats.
Well, that was always a distant ambition for me. I only ever wanted to, I didn't even see myself as a leading actor. I hoped these parts would come my way, but for a long time, I thought I could be a very decent supporting actor. And then my ambitions changed and other things changed.
After fame?
Star Trek had a huge impact on that.
Yeah, I'm
sure. In every way, in the way that it affected my personal life, my financial security, my feelings about myself. I've got so much to thank that show for.
So it's interesting. So that was very much extroverted decider talk. The guy who's giving the interview is very effy, very extroverted feeling. So how do you feel like you compare with these great people? Where are you in this hierarchy? They're so amazing. How can you possibly compare with these people? This is a very effy question. Patrick does not engage with it directly, but there's still a lot of emotional content in what he's saying. It's very extroverted focused, and there's a lot of emotion in it, but he's not engaging with the FE directly. So this was really confusing for me, honestly, as I was going through this. Here's Patrick talking about a situation where you need complex emotional processing to make decisions about how to do and cast plays.
And I only had this one thought, and it was perhaps my only significant contribution to the production at the very beginning. I strongly advocated that my Lady Macbeth should be significantly younger because I hoped that that would create a dynamic, a marital, sexual dynamic between them, which could help to explain and justify some of the rather difficult aspects of the early part of the play. How does she have this control over him? Why can she persuade him to do things that he admits are against his judgment, his social conscience, his morality, and yet he does them?
It's age, do you think, in part?
I think that he has an out-of-control devotion, passion, and dedication to this beautiful, exciting, thrilling, dangerous woman. And he gives into it. Why are you laughing, Charlie? You say, oh, yes, that's my life, exactly.
So that's a lot of very complicated emotional processing. And it's kind of interesting to hear how he goes through that. So as I'm going through this, as I'm trying to type Patrick Stewart, it's very obvious that he is tribe over self. He's very focused on understanding the way the world around him works and his place in it before he is looking to himself for decisions on how to proceed. This is him talking about how he decided to take on the role of Jean-Luc Picard.
I didn't believe in it at all. It made no sense to me that I would be cast in a Hollywood syndicated, first-run syndication TV series about science fiction, because I'd never seen the original show. In fact, when I first auditioned for the role, and I auditioned 4 times, I had to ask my children to fill me in on what Star Trek meant, because I'd never watched it. They watched it every Saturday afternoon. I was always at the theater. It was that it seemed to me an absurd notion to cast a middle-aged, bald, English classical actor in a science fiction TV series. Even my agent in Hollywood, when I said, look, and when we first discussed the contract, I was so naive about anything. And he said, and of course, every year for 6 years, it will. And I said, what do you mean 6 years? And he said, well, that's what you'll sign for if you do that. And I said, I can't do that. I have other things to do. And he said, you're being offered a television series. What other things do you have? I said, well, there's a play. I might, forget that. But he assured me, don't worry, this series is not going to work. You'll be lucky to make it through the first season. You cannot revive an iconic series like Star Trek. So, come over, make a bit of money for the first time in your life, get a suntan, go home. And it didn't quite work out that way, because 7 years later, we finally wrapped the series after 178 episodes.
So I feel a little bit better about this after looking through the Dave and Shannon video, because Dave mentioned several times that Patrick Stewart feels very FE. There's a lot of extroverted decider talking, very focused on other people's opinions and working with other people, and also a lot of emotion. And that should be like FE.
Hard time with his type. I was kind of going off of left field. You gave me some cheaties and you helped me out. We'll get into that.
We cheats.
A funny memes, funny faces. I thought for sure he had FE. How does he not have FE?
I did not.
He felt FE to me.
That's interesting.
Benedict Cumberbatch or whatever. Kind of felt like the kind of slanted eyes, I
don't know. He has.
Yeah, so he feels very FE because of all of this emotional content and because of all this extroverted decider thinking. So we're going to go into a little bit about how and why he's TE. So here's an example of him talking about how Gene Roddenberry didn't really want him on Star Trek.
What we were doing, and occasionally I would catch him looking at me, and I know that he was thinking, what the hell is this guy doing in my show? Because I don't think he'd ever got I am told that somewhere in the archives, in the cellars of Paramount, there is a memo which came from Gene to everybody on the production saying that he did not want to hear my name mentioned again. And
amazing.
but
what was it? What was he looking for?
Well, when this new series was announced and the casting, the Los Angeles Times described me as unknown British Shakespearean actor Patrick Stewart. Well, as a foretaste of the kind of company I was going to be keeping in this new series, Brent Spiner, who played Data the android, he had a sign made. And I came back to my trailer one day and it was stuck on my trailer door and it said in big red letters, "Beware, unknown British Shakespearean actor."
So he is talking about his qualifications rather than his values, which is very TE speak. And so that's one of the things, like looking back over these videos, I can see it a little bit more clearly that he's doing extroverted thinking talk where he's talking about kind of the practical ways to work with stuff and work with people and their qualifications for doing things. So here's him talking about, again, that clip kind of that we saw before. How do you compare with other people? And he doesn't directly engage with the feeling. It's not other people's value that he's comparing with, but the qualifications for doing so.
So a question about Macbeth. So you have to inhabit this role, as you said, and it's a drug. but it's been done and done and done and done and done by people of great talent. Oh, yeah. So what do you ask yourself? You know, you say, I'm going to step into these shoes, and Olivier has been there, and O'Toole has been there, and Gielgud has been there, and, you know.
In the past, that was intimidating. When I was working a lot at Stratford years and years ago, every opening night, I used to walk down to Holy Trinity Church.
Yeah.
Late in the afternoon and sit in one of the front pews where I could see the tomb. And, you know, I would say to this guy, help me out. Please help me out. I don't know what I'm doing.
Dear Willie, dear Willie, dear Willie.
Give me a sign. You know,
So this is about thinking, this is about the strategies, getting advice from people on how to do things, not getting feedback from people on what his value is, but how to do what he's trying to do. So this is TE talk, not FE talk. And this is another take from David Shannon. So if you have extroverted thinking on one end of your personality, it means that you're going to have introverted feeling on the other. So you should be able to see Patrick having FI, and if he's Savior TE, it means that he's going to have Demon FI.
I could not see that Patrick Stewart was FI. See, I can't even say it. FI. And so you had to help me with this as I was getting his type narrowed down. And so these next clips, he's with the race car guys.
Okay.
And there's where I finally was able to see some awkward FI.
Versus...
Some awkward, inappropriate, socially inappropriate, emotional valuing. I'm like, oh,
that's how we like to do it.
There's one primary reason. We were quite poor when we were growing up. We didn't have a car. My parents never, ever owned a car. Of course, didn't drive. In my street, there was one family that owned a car, and the Cloughs had this SS Jaguar. Jaguar. It's living in America.
Yeah.
You learn to say Jaguar.
Yeah. Well, you can learn it now, because we're back in...
Yes, I know where we are. And not only was this a fabulously beautiful car, but the Cloughs had a very, very attractive daughter. You never know who's watching, of course, when you're saying this.
I hope she is watching this daughter. I don't know where we're going with this, but...
Valerie, are you still out there?
Yeah.
Because
she's behind the sofa.
No, she said you... well,
come on, what
you missed
happened?
that. Well, we used to... As
what
I say,
happened with Valerie Clough?
We would make out in the back of the SS Jaguar. So it wasn't just that the... and by that, I mean, you know, heavy petting, as the term is. I wasn't quite sure at the time which excited me more, the heavy petting or being in the SS Jaguar.
Yeah.
I realised now, looking back, that I should have been excited by the Jaguar and not by the petting.
Nah, it's the double whammy, isn't it? Yeah, that's the great thing.
I'm so uncomfortable right now. Why?
And just also to throw an observer is like, yeah, I kind of like the car more than I like the girl. You'll hear observers talk about that, especially with like sports cars or whatever. They're like, It's like a second girlfriend.
Okay, so one thing that I get super uncomfortable about my own self especially is that the stupid TE has to be accurate. It has to explain everything. It has to tell the truth.
It's like a lie detector gone wrong.
It's like, you know, like you can drink truth serum or whatever if that is a real thing.
The FIs are so good at lying. Saviors and FEs
God.
FEs only lie.
I know.
They only lie.
I know.
And the FIs are good at lying, and that's why.
Yeah, so this is a clip where Patrick Stewart is kind of awkward about the things that he likes, and it's not really as socially appropriate. It's not it's not very comfortable television, as she was mentioning. So this is kind of an example of Demon FI. There are a bunch of other examples that I now, in retrospect, I may have able to better pick up on. So whenever people compliment him or talk about how attractive he is, that always makes him uncomfortable. That is kind of a bit of a Demon FI thing.
You were chosen by TV Guide as what? What was it they called you?
They called me the most bodacious, which was a word I had to look up.
What does it mean?
Well, it seems to mean charismatic, attractive, interesting.
Sexy.
That was a term that others have given it, yes.
So People magazine gives it to Sean Connery and TV Guide gives it to you.
How do you read into that?
To imports. What do you read into it?
These bald-headed English imports.
So one of the cool things is like that was the Demon FI. Now watch for the shift into a more comfortable personality function.
I can't say. Maybe it's because there is something slightly exotic about.
So did you see that personality, that shift in comfort and emotional tone? So that is a shift between functions from the Demon FI to talking about his external qualifications in the TE. Here's another really cool clip where he talks about very consciously how he's thinking about his emotions in a demon FI state, where you are uncomfortable with your own darkness and might have difficulty with your own emotional authenticity.
The curiosity is that I lived as an actor for many years, for decades, with a severe handicap, which was a fear of actually experiencing strong emotions. So I learned, which is a great British acting skill, to fake it and to make it look authentic. Murderous rage, fury, even happiness. All these things I learned to fake as an actor until one experience in one of Shakespeare's plays, The Winter's Tale, and the director, the late Ronald Eyre, said to me, "This play can only work if we believe that you are such a person. Therefore, I'm telling you that Leontes and all of his horrible impulses lives inside you. And what you must do is show them to us. All of those dark and ugly secrets that we all possess must be on display, has to be exposed. And if you take that risk," Ronald Eyre said, he was also a psychologist and I felt safe with him, he assured me that he would hold my hand and stand at my side, metaphorically, and see that I didn't fall. And I didn't. After that experience, I realized I couldn't fake it anymore. That what I was asked to bring to my acting work had to be authentic, the real thing. And if I could not find these emotions and feelings inside me, then I would have to find some imaginatively creative way of simulating those feelings, but not, believe me, faking it for a moment. This had happened shortly before the bizarre incident of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
So that's a really, really cool clip because it's a very articulate way of describing being afraid of one's own dark side, one's own feelings, one's own desires and motivations. And so I feel like that's a really good example of Demon FI. Okay, so we're going to go on to observers. We're going to be talking about sensing versus intuition. This is the way that you process information. And so here's some clips with him talking with Larry King. Larry King is very in terms of he's very focused on the tangible, meaningful interpretations of things. And so here they are kind of arguing a little bit about what it means to be a good actor. And notice how they're on the same topic, but they have they're speaking two different languages.
Therefore, good acting is good acting, whether you're doing science fiction or Shakespeare, right? It's still, is the character good? Is he fun to play? And are the lines good to read, right?
Do you have a good story to tell? And is there a person in front of the camera with some depth and interest to them?
Yeah, so those were completely different. So Larry King was talking about how, good is good. It doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter what the context is. It's it has a tangible quality to it. And Patrick's response is there needs to be depth of understanding in order for it to be good acting. So very, very different take on the same sort of thing, same topic. And here he is asking Picard if it's difficult to imagine science fiction as a cast member of Star Trek.
One of the things that might be different about science fiction is you have to imagine yourself in another time sphere, not the past that you could research, but the future that you can't. Is that hard?
Future of the imagination. And yet what makes, despite all of its high technology and its special effects and its projection into the 24th century, what makes the show successful in one principal area is that we're always dealing with human feelings passing between human beings, even though sometimes at the other side of the view screen they're aliens not looking like you or me.
So for Larry King, doing that kind of imagination work is actually really hard. And so he would expect other people to find it hard also. For Patrick Stewart, it's totally easy. It's very difficult to find freakouts, honestly. So when you're doing objective personality, one of the big things you're looking for is the person kind of losing it emotionally or not being able to handle some type of function. And that was really hard to find with Patrick Stewart because a lot of it seems so tribe-centric. You'd expect some sort of tribe self, afraid of his own identity swing, but turns out he's an observer. And there aren't a lot of observer freakouts, but there are some. Here he is talking about one of the props that he's using in Shakespeare.
Even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips.
I think we have done about 170 performances of this production, and watching that little clip there, I realized, and I'm tempting the theatre fates in this respect, the cork has never broken once. That cork has come out cleanly 170 times, and it's a sad fact, but those are the things that become really important to you. Will the cork come out of the bottle? Will I?
So that's an example of kind of an observer freakout. Not a big one, but that's where his mind is focused. And here he is talking about sort of past events.
Even-handed justice commends the ingredients.
That is the wrong clip. Okay, so here he is. Okay, so this is past events. So he's talking about getting knighted, and he almost misses it because the invitation to get knighted was in the mail. And so the issue here is that he's ignoring physical reality so much that it is causing.
It's just this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's a big deal for me because it was totally unexpected. And it almost didn't happen because the invitation to accept or not this honor came in a brown envelope, and it was put into a plastic shopping bag with a whole lot of other mail. And when I arrived at my destination that weekend, I put it in the closet and found it 10 days later.
Wait a minute. First of all, I can't believe that's how they notify you in England that you're going to be knighted, that it just goes out with junk mail, you know? Right. Mm-hmm. And then you almost didn't open it.
Except that it doesn't have written across it, free final offer.
Yeah.
So this is an example of where he's not paying attention to his physical surroundings, to what's happening in reality, so much that it really causes problems. And so that's a big hint that there is a void in his personality is when it is causing issues. A couple things that I've noticed about Patrick Stewart. Patrick Stewart has been a real inspiration to me since I was very young. And one of the things that I noticed over and over again in these clips is that he's very good at gratitude. He has this constant awareness of sort of the debt to society and people and recognizing how that has impacted him.
However, it transformed other aspects of my life in a very positive way, in that it made me, so far as the theatre was concerned, suddenly bankable. That is, I could open plays, whether in New York or Los Angeles or London or Washington or wherever. And ironically, having been so afraid of exposing myself to so much television, it opened a multitude of doors, including a return to the Royal Shakespeare Company, no longer as a, jobbing supporting actor, but as a leading member of the company, simply because my presence put bums on seats, and really little else other than that. So I have to be grateful for those 7 years, in that they have transported me to this place where for the last 7 years I have been able to play great role after great role after great role, and enjoy myself more as an actor than I have at any time in the 50-odd years of a career.
And here he is talking about or thanking someone for helping him understand his father.
I'm immensely grateful for all that you've told me. You can't be aware, but your words are helping me to create and make significant readjustments about this man I knew.
And here is a clip with him talking about being grateful for the way that people have kind of responded to Star Trek. There's a lot of people who have seen Star Trek as an example of an optimistic future, which honestly doesn't exist a lot in fiction. Most fiction is very negative, pessimistic about the future. And so here he is talking about kind of being inspired by these values and being inspired by other people being inspired.
Ever grown tired of hearing from people who stop me in the street or in a restaurant? Well, no, I don't like being interrupted while I'm eating. But who say to me, your show changed my life. Without Star Trek, The Next Generation, I might not be here. And I always respond to those letters, to those notes, and to those words when I hear them in the street. My personal favorite, which makes me very emotional, came from a detective sergeant with the Las Vegas Police Department. He wrote to me about his life and his work, and towards the end he said, you know, there are days, I love my job, but there are days when I go home that what I have seen, what I have experienced, the cruelty, the barbarity, the viciousness, the nastiness of what I've experienced makes me despair for the future of our society and the world. But when I feel like that, I go to my video shelf and I take down Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I know we're going to have a future.
And so, yeah, this is a really cool example of how his extroverted deciding allowing himself to be inspired by other people being inspired is really cool for ways that I'm still processing. So, some observations about Patrick Stewart. He is very emotional. He's very keyed into the human condition. He understands depth of feeling, and he's kind of mastered gratitude. And when I looked at that initially, that looked a lot like F.E. When you go back and you look at the clip specifically, the way that he's engaging with the tribe is based off of qualifications, the way to do things, and basically making decisions based off of other people's input and working with them, not necessarily absorbing other people's values or values of himself, using their understanding of what his value is to judge himself. So what I was able to get from this was extrovert decider, very sensitive to tribe judgment, obviously, very emotional. He's very abstract, probably any. He's very open to exploring things and is very focused on opportunity, and he seems people-focused. What Dave and Shannon got that I missed is that he is thinking over feeling. He is focused on things and concepts, not people. So he's an observer, not a decider, which was kind of difficult for me to pick up on. So here is his personality type. You have NE at the top. You have TE second, FI. The demon FI is going to be his third function. Fourth function is going to be SI. So this is somebody who's going to have a harder time kind of doing things in reality, but is very interested in engaging with new ideas. Some pros, very heavy on concepts. He's going to be working well with others. He's going to be taking responsibility very seriously. And obviously with playing consume as two of the top animals, he's going to be a really good listener. Some cons, he's going to have trouble talking if he's blast last, which is weird because he's an actor. He's clearly gotten over talking to people Kind of. That's something to maybe go back and look at, because that's weird. He is very forgetful when he has dates or details or things. There's a lot of examples where he just kind of forgets important information. And he might have a hard time being a first mover, so that might be a hard thing in his life. So the big question for me is, how do you have this guy who is Savior TE being so effective and comfortable with deep emotional processing? And I think a lot of that comes from his childhood, dealing with having an abusive father.
And I have a distinct memory of rolling from my cot into her bed and then rolling back again and thinking that was good fun. And so I think that I was indulged and spoiled and petted and loved during those 5 years. All of that changed dramatically when this man appeared in the house. In many respects, not for the better either. At weekends, when he had been drinking, he could get very angry. I don't ever recall being hit by him. Even when at times I would intervene in rows between my mother and my father, I would put my body between them at what I thought were critical moments. And I don't remember him ever even pushing me hard or being violent with me. But he was to my mother. He hit her. He threw things at her.
So one of the things that I've noticed doing these videos is that people who are given very traumatic, difficult events early in their lives and then are able to adapt to them, that radically shifts how they are able to process that function later in their life. So one of the things that Patrick needed to deal with was understanding the complexity of the emotions involved in a domestic abusive family situation, where his mother has, you might love your father, but he's also abusive. And that's a difficult thing to work through.
I think of my mother often and the loneliness she must have felt at times. But she adored my father. I mean, later on, my brother and I discussed with her, leaving him, but there was no question of it. I think she really loved him.
So being able to do that requires a lot of very deep emotional processing at a young age. And while that is incredibly difficult, the skills that he gained from those difficult experiences served him later in life. It's still very damaging, though. It clearly has affected him in a lot of ways, as you would kind of expect.
In that, one of the things that I said was that I was not a violent child, but if my mother had, at any point during between the ages of 5 and 12, picked up a knife or any other weapon against my father, I would have held her hand as she did it. I would have locked the door while she carried it out. That's how bad it was to be growing up inside a violent household.
So yeah, that's really hard, and it affected his relationships too.
And I know it in my own life. In the past, I have had issues in relationships and with women in my life which have a history in the experiences that I had as a child in my own home. It is a worldwide phenomena, and in places, in countries of a much more severe and destructive form than anything that I experienced.
So you'll notice there in that clip, he jumps away from processing his own darkness. He's much more comfortable looking at the broader picture, but he understands that it's really important to do that internal emotional work, which is one of the things that makes him so impressive. So one of the things that I think is really cool is the way that he was able to look back on this situation and kind of do deep empathy processing with regards to both his mother and his father. He got information, talked with people, worked with people, and came to understand what happened to his father in a different light in retrospect.
I do what I do in my mother's name because I couldn't help her then. Now I can. But since, and I've talked often about this, I'm on record about my childhood, but last year I learned things about my father that I didn't know and my elder brother didn't know. And that was that in 1940, due to his experiences in France with the British Expeditionary Force, my father was suffering from what was then called severe shell shock. And that's what I read in his notes at the Imperial War Museum in England. We now know it as post-traumatic stress disorder, and we also know that there are soldiers now all over the world, here in the United States and in the United Kingdom, who are returning from combat zones with a serious condition of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now we know what it is and we know how to deal with it. In 1940, it was just shell shock, and basically soldiers were being told, pull yourself together, get a grip on yourself and get out there and be a man. Well, it has put into an expert in this condition who works with a charity, another organization I'm now happy to be a patron of, called Combat Stress, has said to me, what your father had in 1940, because he was never treated, never left him. And all the conditions of your childhood that you have described to me are classic symptoms of veterans who were suffering from this serious psychological and physical illness. So I work for refuge for my mother, and I work for combat stress for my father in equal measure.
So this is a really cool and inspiring thing for me. So we have Patrick Stewart, who is NETE, very extroverted, focused, paying attention to kind of the practical needs of others, but understanding his life in a more global context. He's a very playful youth, and he grows up with traumatic domestic abuse. In order to survive and deal with that domestic abuse, he needs to figure out how to deal with dark emotions and connections between people, and he used his love of Shakespeare to learn how to process and deal with that emotion. He was able to use his extroverted decider to get a role that other people liked. He got cast as Captain Picard in Star Trek, and that opened lots of doors for him. And then he was able to use that depth of emotional understanding to bring a lot of depth to his characters, but also to better understand his parents and kind of rewrite the narrative of his life and use that deeper understanding to help women who are victims of domestic abuse as well as men who are victims of PTSD. And I just think that's awesome. Thanks so much. And next time we're going to be talking about, have a couple ideas for different topics we can talk about. I'm probably going to start with having personalities, having conversations, talking past each other in cognitive blindness, but hopefully we'll get to all these others. Cool. Thanks for joining me, and good luck out there.